She took control when everyone else froze, guiding the failing aircraft through chaos as alarms screamed around her. At first, it didn't feel real. The cockpit had been calm only moments before, filled with the soft hum of the engines, the rhythmic blinking of instruments, and the quiet confidence that comes from thousands of successful flights. But everything changed in a single heartbeat. A violent jolt, a deafening bang, and one of the engines erupted in a twisting flare of fire. The aircraft shuddered so hard it felt like the wings would tear away. Masking her fear, she gripped the controls with both hands, forcing herself to exhale before instinct took over. Her co-pilot stared at the panel, frozen, unable to move or speak as warning lights flashed like a storm of red stars. It was as if time had slowed for everyone except her. Passengers screamed behind the locked cockpit door, a metallic groan rippled through the fuselage as the massive aircraft dipped sharply to the left. She didn't think, she acted. Her training, memories, instincts, all of it surged to the front of her mind like a wave. She leveled the yoke, fighting the overpowering pull of gravity, trying to ignore the sickening vibration that rattled her bones. The radio hissed with static, drowning out the automated alarms repeating the same mechanical phrase over and over again. Engine 2 failure. Hydraulic pressure low. Stall warning. Terrain proximity. Every sound layered on the next until it became a single overwhelming scream inside her head. Yet somehow, through that deafening storm, she managed to create a small mental space of silence just wide enough to think one clear thought: keep the aircraft in the sky. She forced the nose up, trying to buy precious altitude as the plane continued to drop. Altitude meant time, and time meant the possibility of survival. Her hands were steady, firm, guiding the aircraft with precision even as the cockpit shook like an angry beast trapped in metal walls. Her voice, steady and controlled, broke through the atmosphere of panic. "I have control." Her co-pilot nodded shakily, grateful someone had taken command. She didn't blame him. The engine failure wasn't normal. The electrical flicker wasn't normal. The simultaneous hydraulic drop wasn't normal. Something deeper, more catastrophic, was happening to the aircraft, and she knew they were seconds away from losing everything. The cabin lights behind her flickered as the aircraft pitched again. She countered with a slight trim adjustment, her fingers dancing across switches even though she couldn't feel anything beyond the vibration numbing her arms. Her throat felt dry, the recycled air suddenly thick, but she refused to let fear win. Fear was a luxury. Fear was something passengers could feel, families could feel, people on the ground could feel. But not her, not here, not now. She radioed the nearest control center, her voice only slightly betraying the adrenaline rushing through her veins. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," she said, the words steady despite the chaos. "This is Flight 309. We've lost Engine 2, hydraulic pressure is dropping, and we are unable to maintain altitude. Request immediate vectors for emergency landing." Static responded at first. Then the controller's voice broke through, sharp and urgent, asking for details. She delivered them with the precision of a surgeon, even as the aircraft lurched again, the altitude meter spinning downward in angry spirals. She didn't dare look back. She didn't dare think about the 183 souls strapped into their seats behind her. She only allowed herself one thought: keep the plane steady, keep it airborne, keep them alive. The world outside the cockpit windows blurred into a chaotic canvas of clouds, streaks of turbulence, cutting through the sky like cracks in glass. She adjusted the yaw, compensating for the asymmetric thrust created by the dead engine. Every second required a new decision. Every new decision carried the weight of life or death. Sweat dripped down her forehead, but she didn't have a free hand to wipe it away. Her eyes stayed locked on the instruments, each needle a lifeline she clung to. The co-pilot regained his senses and began running emergency checklists, calling out readings with a voice that trembled but tried to remain functional. Together, without needing to look at each other, they worked like two gears in the same machine, each depending entirely on the other to keep that machine from bursting into flames midair. She had flown through storms, turbulence, crosswinds that pushed the plane sideways, but this was different. This wasn't nature testing the aircraft, this was the aircraft fighting against itself. A sudden loud pop shook the cabin again. The entire left wing shuddered. She tightened her grip instinctively, feeling the aircraft drag to one side. The co-pilot's voice cracked as he shouted, "We've lost more pressure." Aileron response is degraded. She didn't need him to say it. She could feel the sluggishness in the controls. It was like steering a truck through deep mud. Every movement was delayed, heavy, unpredictable. But she continued fighting, coaxing the aircraft step by step back toward stability. Calm. Breathe. Don't let the chaos win. Her heart pounded so fast she felt it in her fingertips, but her mind remained razor-sharp. Every second mattered. The aircraft sank lower, approaching dangerous altitudes. The ground loomed somewhere beneath the clouds, hidden but threatening. She adjusted the thrust on the remaining engine, redistributing power as best she could. Then something strange began to happen. The turbulence outside shifted. The static in the radio changed tone. A faint shadow drifted into view through the corner of the cockpit window. At first, she dismissed it as stress, a trick of light. But it grew bigger, clearer, more defined, a shape slicing through the sky with purpose and power. An aircraft. No, not just any aircraft. A fighter jet. It glided into formation beside her damaged passenger plane, its sleek gray frame flying so close she could see the pilot inside. The moment hit her chest like a shockwave. She knew that silhouette, she knew that aircraft model. And when the radio crackled to life again, a new voice, calm, authoritative, steady, broke through the chaos. Flight 309, this is Falcon 2-1. We're with you. Her breath caught. The F-22 pilot spoke again, the confidence in his tone cutting through the noise like a blade. We've identified your descent path. Maintain current heading. You're doing fine. Echo. Echo. Her call sign. A name she hadn't heard since her military aviation days, a name only a handful of people knew. Hearing it now, in this moment of terror, felt surreal. Her co-pilot shot her a stunned look. She didn't explain. There wasn't time. The fighter jet held its position like a guardian, matching every wobble, every drop, every unstable movement of her crippled aircraft. The presence of that jet did something she desperately needed. It reminded her she wasn't alone, not anymore. Support had arrived. Guidance was here. Someone was watching her. 6. Echo, the F-22 pilot said again. You've got this. Bring them home. Her chest tightened, but her focus sharpened even more. She guided the aircraft downward with renewed strength. The runway came into view through a break in the clouds, a thin strip of hope carved into the landscape. Air traffic control coordinated with the fighter escort. Emergency crews mobilized. The passengers behind her braced for impact. She made tiny corrections, every adjustment an act of technical finesse honed over years. The aircraft descended faster than she preferred, but there was no choice. The hydraulics were failing completely, keeping the plane airborne much longer wasn't possible. The fighter jet held its escort position until the last possible moment before peeling away in a breathtaking arc, giving her a final radio transmission before disappearing into the clouds. Echo, good luck. She didn't reply. Her full focus was on the runway. The ground rushed upward. She flared the plane as best she could, fighting through the failing controls and the weight of 183 lives depending on her. The landing gear slammed onto the runway hard enough to jolt her teeth, bouncing once, twice. She countered the rebound, slamming the aircraft down firmly but securely. Tires screeched. Metal groaned. Sparks flickered for an instant. But the aircraft stayed on the ground. It stayed intact. It stayed alive, and so did everyone inside. The plane finally rolled to a stop, smoke rising from the brakes, alarms still blaring long after the danger had passed. She sat there in silence for several seconds, her hands still gripping the controls, her chest heaving with exhaustion and relief. The co-pilot stared ahead, speechless. Fire crews surrounded the aircraft. She closed her eyes as the final realization washed over her. She had done it. She had saved them, all 183 passengers. Every single one, and somewhere high above, hidden once again in the endless sky, an F-22 pilot who remembered her call sign flew silently away, leaving her with the quiet knowledge that in her moment of greatest need, someone had answered. Someone who believed in her. Someone who knew exactly who she was. Echo. With impossible focus, she stabilized the plane, fighting turbulence and engine failure to keep 183 terrified passengers alive. The moment she took control, the world around her condensed into a narrow tunnel, everything else fading into a distant blur. The alarms, the screams, the metallic groaning of a wounded aircraft, they blended into a single, monstrous roar. But her mind filtered it all out. She heard only what mattered, saw only what was essential, felt only what she could control. The yoke trembled in her hands like a living creature desperate to escape her grip. It wasn't normal turbulence, not the kind pilots joke about during smooth flights. This was something violent, unpredictable, like the sky itself was trying to tear the aircraft apart. Each gust slammed into the fuselage with enough force to shake loose any trace of calm left in the cabin. Oxygen masks dangled like pale ghosts in the aisles. The smell of burned fuel seeped into the cockpit. Yet she didn't flinch. Her hands were firm, her jaw was set, her pulse thundered, but in a steady rhythm that pushed her forward instead of holding her back. She made micro-adjustments with expert precision, tapping the rudder pedals and shifting the throttle on the remaining engine. The plane was lopsided now, its symmetry destroyed by the dead engine on the right wing. She could feel the drag pulling them sideways. The aircraft leaned heavily, like it wanted to fall out of the sky and give up. But she wouldn't let it. She fought the yaw with patient, calculated movements, coaxing the aircraft back toward level flight. Her co-pilot's voice wavered as he called out failing indicators, the words tumbling from his mouth in a half-panicked stream. Hydraulics unstable, fuel transfer irregular, altitude dropping, response delayed, but she didn't need him to tell her. She felt every fault in her bones. Her body was connected to the aircraft now, every vibration, every shudder, every unnatural groan. She sensed the danger not as numbers on a screen, but as a living instinct thrumming through her muscles. The storm outside thickened into a mass of violent winds and swirling gray. Lightning flickered somewhere far off, illuminating the clouds in brief, ghostly flashes. The aircraft plunged into pockets of turbulence that slammed it downward in sickening drops. The passengers undoubtedly felt weightless in those moments, their stomachs rising into their throats, but she forced the nose up again and again, refusing to let the aircraft succumb to gravity's pull. The radio crackled with interference, distorting the frantic voices of air traffic controllers trying to reach her. But the messages were broken, unclear, more noise than guidance. It was as if they were trapped inside a storm so thick that even sound struggled to escape. Her training kicked in with surgical precision. She cross-checked altitude, engine output, airspeed, and the trembling artificial horizon that fought to stay even. The plane wasn't stalling, not yet, but it was close. Too close. She needed to maintain speed while compensating for the lost thrust, which meant pushing the remaining engine harder than any engineer ever intended. She knew the risks. She knew the limits. She pushed the throttle anyway. The engine roared in protest, sputtering before stabilizing under the strain. The airframe creaked like an old ship caught in the wrath of a stormy sea. Panels rattled, overhead compartments slammed open. Somewhere behind her, a baby cried with a frantic pitch that cut through the chaos like a blade. A flight attendant tried to shout instructions, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of the wind and the agonizing whine of the aircraft. She wished she could speak to the passengers. She wished she could promise them she'd bring them home. But she couldn't leave the controls, not for a second. Every fraction of a moment mattered. Every heartbeat carried the weight of an entire plane full of people who trusted her without even knowing her name. Her mind sifted through simulations she had trained for, emergency procedures drilled into her muscle memory. But none of them were like this. This wasn't a textbook scenario. This wasn't a planned engine failure or a predictable mechanical malfunction. This was chaos layered on chaos, a perfect storm of worst-case events all colliding at once. But she had been forged for moments like this. Even if she hadn't known it, the sky had always tested her more harshly than others. Storms she'd flown through, crosswinds she'd defeated, night landings that challenged every sense she possessed, they had all quietly prepared her for this exact moment. Her breath remained steady despite the racing of her heart. She didn't blink as she scanned the instruments. She couldn't afford to. Her eyes burned from the dryness, but she pushed past it. She adjusted pitch again to counter a sudden drop in altitude. The aircraft dipped violently, passengers screaming as gravity shifted. She pulled back smoothly, not overcorrecting, understanding that panic in her movements would translate into panic in the aircraft's behavior. Smooth, controlled, deliberate, that was the only way to survive. The co-pilot looked at her like she was carved out of something stronger than fear. He stumbled over his words. How are you keeping this stable? She didn't answer. There was no time for explanations. Only action. The aircraft's autopilot had disconnected on its own earlier, overwhelmed by the contradictory signals flooding its sensors. It was a machine built for order, not chaos. It didn't stand a chance. But she was something different entirely. She could think through chaos. She could see the path through disaster even when everything around her fell apart. A violent gust slammed the plane sideways, nearly throwing her headfirst into the instrument panel. She gritted her teeth and countered with expert timing, guiding the aircraft back with steady control. The turbulence felt personal now, like the sky was testing her resolve, daring her to fail. She accepted the challenge with silent determination. The altitude indicator flashed a warning. They were dropping faster now. Too fast. The storm was pushing them down, and the aircraft lacked the power to climb. She needed to reduce drag. She needed to adjust airflow. She needed more lift, but the flaps risked jamming in their damaged state. Using them could tear part of the wing off. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then she deployed them, just enough to give the wings the lift they needed. The plane shuddered violently, metal straining, but the wings held. She exhaled slowly. Her instincts remained unwavering. Her body leaned into every movement, aligning with the aircraft as if the two of them shared a single nervous system. Each adjustment she made countered another force trying to kill them. She moved with purpose, aware that one mistake could end everything. Another warning alarm screamed in the cockpit, its pitch sharp enough to rattle her teeth. The co-pilot hissed, "We're losing vertical speed control." She already knew. She could feel the downward pull like a magnet dragging the aircraft toward the earth. She pushed the nose gently upward, nudging the aircraft into a more stable descent profile. She couldn't climb, not with the power they had left, but she could control the way they fell. Behind her, she could imagine the passengers gripping their seats, their eyes squeezed shut wide with fear as the plane jolted and rumbled. Some prayed, some cried, some held the hands of strangers. They didn't know her. They didn't know her story, her fears, her past. Yet at this moment, their lives were in her hands. All of them, every last one, and she refused to let them down. She remembered her father once telling her, long before she ever flew a plane, that some people were born with an inner compass, something that always pointed the way, even when the world around them spun wildly out of control. She had always wondered if he'd been wrong. Her life had been filled with detours, doubts, and unexpected turns. But now, steering a crippled aircraft through a storm that wanted to destroy it, she realized he had been right all along. Her compass pointed one direction. Forward, through the storm, through the chaos, through the impossible. A small window of clear air appeared ahead, a break in the clouds like an opening carved by fate itself. She angled the plane toward it, fighting crosswinds that shoved back like a giant unseen hand. The aircraft groaned, but she kept it steady. The co-pilot's voice steadied slightly. "We might make it through this pocket." "We will," she said softly. The plane pierced through the turbulent wall and burst into a calmer section of sky. The relief was immediate but short-lived. The engine sputtered again, warning lights flared, and the aircraft dipped dangerously before she caught it. She corrected, stabilized, controlled. The storm wasn't done, but neither was she. Minutes passed like hours. Every second weighed heavy. Her arms ached, her back burned, her eyes stung, but she willed herself not to break, not to slip, not to give in to the exhaustion creeping up her limbs. She fought the plane back toward a glide path that might give them a chance, a real chance, to survive. The co-pilot relayed updates, but she already knew what mattered. She felt it, she sensed it, everything was failing, but she wasn't. The passengers behind her didn't know how close they came to falling. They didn't know how close they still were. They didn't know the storm inside the cockpit, where death hovered just inches away with every tremor in the controls. She adjusted pitch again as another downdraft caught them. She compensated, she fought, she survived, because that's what she did. Because that's who she was. The sky unleashed one last violent burst of turbulence, throwing the aircraft into a stomach-lurching drop. A collective scream erupted from the cabin. The co-pilot grabbed the console to steady himself. But her hands were already moving. She pulled the yoke with a strength she didn't know she had left. Her arms shook, her chest burned, her breath hitched, but the plane responded, slowly, painfully, but surely. The descent flattened, the aircraft stabilized once more. And then, finally, blessedly, the storm began to thin. They broke through the last wall of violent clouds into a calmer sky, still gray, still dangerous, but no longer trying to kill them. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The passengers cried, prayed, cheered, or sobbed quietly into their hands. They didn't know how close they had come. They didn't know what she had done for them. But one day they would. For now, all that mattered was the sky calming around them. She had kept them alive. All 183. Through impossible focus. Through willpower stronger than fear. Through a storm that should have torn them apart. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot, but for the first time since the disaster began, they had a chance. A real chance. Because she had refused to let the sky take them. Because she had fought back. Because she was the kind of pilot who didn't break. Not even when the world around her did. Moments before disaster, an F-22 appeared beside her window, its pilot breaking radio silence to speak her call sign. At first, she thought she was hallucinating. The storm had been relentless, the alarms deafening, the failing controls demanding every ounce of strength she possessed. She believed she had seen everything the sky could throw at her. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for the shadow slicing through the chaos of clouds, closing in on her crippled aircraft like a ghost carved from steel and speed. She blinked once, hard, to make sure her vision wasn't betraying her. But the silhouette didn't vanish. It grew clearer, sharper, undeniable. The nose of the stealth fighter cut through the storm clouds like a blade through silk. Its wings glistened with condensation trails. Its engines left rippling vibrations in the air. And its pilot, calm, composed, familiar in a way that made her heartbeat stutter, stared back through his visor as if he had known exactly where to find her. The F-22 locked into formation beside her failing passenger jet, flying with a precision so perfect it looked surreal. It matched her speed even though she was barely staying airborne. It matched her altitude even though her plane was sinking. It matched her turbulence even though it could have soared above it with ease. It held position like a guardian angel carved out of titanium. Then the radio crackled, a broken hiss of static that cut through the cockpit like a whisper of hope. For the first time in long, impossible minutes, she heard something other than alarms and distress calls. Echo, her call sign, a name she had buried long ago, deep under layers of civilian life, routine flights, and the quiet ache of past decisions. A name she had not heard since her final day in the military, closing the door on the only world that had ever made her feel truly alive. A name she believed no one would ever speak to her again, especially not here, not now, not in this moment of absolute chaos. Her co-pilot whipped his head toward her. Echo, he mouthed silently, confusion written across his face. But she didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat tightened, her breath caught, her emotions shaken loose by the familiarity of a name she had almost forgotten how to wear. The voice continued, stronger now, cutting through interference with authority and absolute confidence. Flight 309, this is Falcon 2-1. I'm on your left wing. I've got you. She swallowed hard, the trembling inside her more emotional than physical. She forced herself to speak, steadier than she felt. Falcon 2-1, identify. A pause, brief but deliberate. Then, didn't expect to see you here, Echo. But I'm damn glad I did. Her chest constricted, not with fear this time, but with something deeper, recognition. She knew that voice, even distorted by the radio, even wrapped in static, it reached through time and memory. A voice from countless training sorties, from missions flown under cover of night, from the unspoken trust between pilots who had stared death in the face and laughed because they had each other. Falcon 2-1 wasn't just a call sign. He was him. She didn't have the luxury to process the flood of emotion. Not while maintaining control of a damaged passenger jet. Not while fighting altitude loss. Not while trying to keep 183 people alive. But his presence, his arrival at the exact moment everything seemed lost, it steadied her in ways she couldn't explain. Her voice cracked only slightly when she replied, Falcon 2-1, we're in critical condition. Engine failure. Hydraulics failing. Control response minimal. I see it, he said calmly. I've been tracking you for 60 miles. You're dropping too fast on the right side. Compensate 2 degrees left. Rudder. Easy. Easy. She responded instinctively, almost forgetting she wasn't flying her old fighter. Her hands moved, adjusting the controls delicately. The aircraft groaned but held its line better. The F-22 mirrored her every movement, guiding her visually even when her instruments flickered in and out with electrical failure. The co-pilot stared, speechless. How is he flying that close in this turbulence? He whispered. She didn't look away from the fighter jet outside her window. Because he's the best there is, she whispered back before she could stop herself. The radio crackled again. Echo, listen to me. You're losing hydraulic fluid fast. You've got maybe 15 minutes before full control lock. We need to get you down now. She tightened her grip on the yoke. I don't have runway clearance. We're too far from the nearest airfield. Negative. Military runway 40 miles south. I've already diverted traffic. Airspace is clear. Emergency crews are on standby. She blinked. You did that. A soft chuckle came through, warm despite the storm. You think I'd let you fall out of the sky? Her chest tightened, the emotion nearly overwhelming her. But she maintained her focus. She had to. She couldn't afford to let humanity, or memories, or the ghost of old connections distract her. The aircraft jerked violently as a new burst of turbulence slammed into them. The warning alarms screamed. The nose dipped sharply. Her co-pilot gasped, gripping his harness. Echo, the F-22 pilot said sharply, pull up 3 degrees, now. She responded instantly, pulling back at just the right angle. The aircraft groaned, metal straining, but the nose came up again. The altitude stabilized, for the moment. Good, he said, voice steady. Stay with me, Echo. You're doing it, just like old times. She exhaled shakily. Old times were in fighter jets, Falcon. This thing weighs almost 200 tons. Then fly it like a fighter, he said, not missing a beat. Make it listen to you. Despite the chaos, she almost smiled. Lightning flashed nearby, illuminating the gray world outside as bright as day for a split second. The fighter jet's sleek frame glowed in that flash, powerful, majestic, utterly fearless. The F-22 flew so close she could see tiny scratches on its surface, see the pilot's gloved hand resting on the throttle, see him turning his helmet slightly toward her as if reminding her that he was there. With her, for her, Echo, he said quietly, you're not alone. Not today. Her breath caught again. The words were simple, but to her, in this moment, they were everything. She wanted to respond, to say something meaningful, but the aircraft jolted again. The co-pilot shouted, hydraulics at 10%. We're losing approach control. Falcon's voice sharpened into military mode. Echo, prepare for manual landing assist. I'll guide you visually. Follow my lead exactly. The fighter jet shifted slightly ahead, just enough to take point but not enough to lose formation. It became both shield and pathfinder, cutting through turbulence, identifying air pockets, giving her a smoother corridor through the storm. Adjust pitch 1 degree down, hold it, there. Good. Right wing stabilizer compensating, easy does it. She followed his instructions with unwavering precision, her hands syncing with his guidance like they had once done in high-speed maneuvers years ago. The deep muscle memory returned, those impossible instincts born from thousands of flight hours beside him. The clouds thinned slowly, revealing patches of ground far below. The airstrip wasn't yet visible, but Falcon 2-1 continued guiding her like a beacon slicing through darkness. Echo, he said softly after a long stretch of silence, you're almost home. Her throat tightened. She blinked away a tear she didn't have time for. Falcon, why are you here? A pause, a breath, a truth unwrapped in stormlight. Because when I heard your voice on the emergency frequency, I couldn't stay away. Her chest ached with something she had buried years ago. Something she didn't have time to revisit. The air traffic control center finally broke through the static. Flight 309, you are cleared for emergency landing. Military escort will remain until touchdown. She didn't need to respond. She needed every breath for flying. Falcon's voice took over again, firm and focused. Runway ahead, you'll see it in 20 seconds. Keep your speed steady, Echo. Don't let her sink too fast. The ground grew clearer. The dark rectangle of the runway emerged from the mist like a promise. 10 seconds, Echo, easy, you've got this. Her co-pilot's voice cracked with awe as he whispered, how is he guiding us so perfectly? Because he knew her. Because he knew how she flew. Because he knew what she needed before she needed it. And because some bonds never break, no matter how many years pass or how many storms come between them. Falcon's voice steadied her one last time. Flare, now. She pulled back smoothly, the aircraft responding slower than a fighter but still responding. The landing gear hit the runway with a brutal jolt, bouncing sharply. She held steady. The second impact was firmer. Smoother. Final. They were on the ground. Screeching brakes. Smoke. Sparks. But they were alive. All 183. The aircraft slowed, rolling to a shaky stop as emergency vehicles rushed in. The alarms finally went silent. She let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck inside her for a lifetime. The radio crackled again. Echo. She looked out her window. The F-22 was peeling away, rising back into the storm like a silent guardian returning to the sky. You did it. Before she could reply, the jet accelerated, climbing into the clouds, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But his final words lingered in the radio, soft, almost intimate. I never stopped trusting you. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle into her soul. He had found her in the sky. He had guided her when she needed him the most. And even though he vanished in the storm, she knew this wasn't the end. The sky was wide, and fate wasn't finished with them yet. In that single moment, she knew she wasn't alone, and something inside her shifted with a quiet but powerful certainty. The crushing weight that had been sitting on her chest since the first engine blew seemed to ease, as if the universe itself had reached out a steadying hand. She had been holding the aircraft together with nothing more than instinct, training, and sheer willpower, but now, with the F-22 flying tight beside her damaged cockpit, she felt the presence of another aviator, one who understood the language of fear, precision, and survival at 30,000 feet better than anyone else on Earth. She didn't need to see his face to understand that he was there for her, for the passengers, and for the sky they both respected like a sacred oath. The aircraft shuddered violently again, reminding her that the danger was still very real. The fuselage groaned like a living creature in pain as the remaining engine strained to keep the behemoth aloft. She tightened her grip on the controls, her hands slick with sweat but steady as if anchored by something deeper than mere discipline. Her heartbeat began syncing itself with the rhythm of the aircraft, feeling every vibration, every warning, every shift of wind pressure across the battered wings. Yet somehow, in this terrifying symphony, she sensed balance returning, slowly, delicately, like a wounded bird finding its last reserve of strength. The F-22 pilot remained perfectly positioned off her wing, flying so close she could make out the subtle scratches on the fighter's nose cone. Military precision held him still, almost motionless in relation to her, despite the fact that they were both cutting through turbulent winds at hundreds of miles per hour. It was an impossible maneuver for ordinary pilots, but he made it look like a natural extension of the sky itself. She could feel his presence, steady and unyielding, like a guardian carved out of steel and discipline. Her radio crackled, the static broken by the faintest acknowledgement from the fighter pilot. He didn't waste time with unnecessary words. He spoke her call sign with such calm clarity that it cut through the panic swirling inside her like a blade slicing through fog. Hearing her call sign in the voice of another aviator, especially one flying an aircraft designed for the most dangerous missions on Earth, felt like a reassurance that she was not fighting this battle on her own anymore. It was a quiet reminder of every hour she had trained, every emergency simulation she had faced, every moment she had doubted herself but pushed through anyway. She exhaled, a long, trembling breath that felt like the release of an entire lifetime of held tension. The F-22 pilot's voice didn't tell her what to do. He didn't need to. He simply reminded her she was capable. He reminded her she belonged in that cockpit. And he reminded her that she could still win this fight. She made the first adjustments carefully, easing the control column forward by a fraction of an inch, feeling how the aircraft responded. The nose dipped slightly, and she countered with a calculated increase in thrust. The plane settled for a moment, then began to stabilize in a new, fragile equilibrium. Every movement she made felt like threading a needle while blindfolded and standing on the edge of a cliff, yet she worked with a calm that surprised even her. For the first time since the emergency began, she believed they might actually make it. Below them, the ocean stretched out like a dark sheet of glass, reflecting the low sun in long ribbons of gold. She knew that if the aircraft lost lift now, it would vanish into that endless expanse within seconds. But she also knew she had one last chance, one final path to salvation, and she could see it forming like a faint line in her mind. The nearest runway wasn't close, but it was reachable if everything went perfectly. She pushed the aircraft toward that distant point, listening to the engines, strained rumble and the wind screaming past the cracked window. Beside her, the F-22 dipped slightly, signaling that it understood her plan. She didn't know how much fuel the fighter had left, or how long the pilot could stay beside her, but he remained silent and steady, matching her descent angle as if the two aircraft were tethered together by invisible lines of trust. It was a formation flown not by procedure but by instinct and mutual commitment, the kind that only those who have faced the sky's fury truly understand. Inside the cabin behind her, the passengers clung to their seats, unaware of the details but painfully aware of the stakes. Many prayed, some cried quietly, others sat frozen in disbelief. But all of them could feel the shift, the subtle, almost imperceptible sense that the aircraft was no longer falling but fighting. Fighting for them, fighting because she refused to let go. The cabin crew, bruised and exhausted yet determined, continued to check on passengers even while bracing themselves for whatever came next. Their courage fed her resolve. The ground control finally re-established contact, their voices urgent yet cautiously hopeful as they relayed wind speed, runway availability, and emergency crew positions. But for her, the voice that mattered most was the steady silence of the F-22 beside her, flying closer than safety protocols would ever allow. It was a presence that spoke without words. "You can do this. I'm here. We finish this together." As they approached the coastline, turbulence intensified again. The aircraft rocked violently, dropping several hundred feet in a sudden, gut-wrenching dip. She steadied it with everything she had left, her muscles burning, her mind laser-focused. The F-22 rolled slightly, adjusting to keep formation, its wingtip almost close enough to touch hers. She could sense the fighter pilot's heartbeat as if it echoed her own determination through the air between them. The runway came into view, a thin strip of hope carved into the landscape. Smoke from emergency vehicles drifted upward in the distance. The sight of that pale ribbon of asphalt made her chest tighten with both relief and fear. Landing was still the most dangerous part. A damaged commercial aircraft could easily break apart if the angle was even slightly off. But failure was no longer an option she allowed herself to imagine. She began her final approach, reducing speed carefully while maintaining just enough lift to keep the aircraft stable. The F-22 eased back half a meter, giving her space but staying close enough that she still felt its presence in her peripheral vision. The fighter pilot didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His silence was a vow of faith in her ability. Altitude decreasing, speed dropping, runway aligning. Her pulse roared in her ears, her breathing slow and controlled as she guided the aircraft lower and lower. At 1,000 feet, the plane shuddered again, warning lights flashing angrily across the control panel. She ignored them. At 500 feet, she trimmed the flaps with delicate precision. At 100 feet, she committed completely, letting instinct and experience merge into a single, flawless motion. The wheels hit the runway hard, bouncing once, then again, before finally gripping the asphalt. The impact jolted the entire aircraft, throwing sparks beneath the fuselage as metal scraped pavement. She held the controls firm, guiding the aircraft straight, refusing to let it veer even an inch. The damaged engine sputtered and died, leaving only the whine of wind and the screech of braking metal. And then, suddenly, impossibly, the aircraft slowed. It slowed enough to stop. It stopped with every soul on board alive. Silence filled the cockpit, thick and overwhelming. She sat back in her seat, her hands trembling as the full weight of what she had just done washed over her. Her chest heaved, her vision blurred with exhausted tears, and for a long moment she couldn't speak or even think. She had brought them home. She had saved them, every last one of the 183 passengers who now cried, prayed, and embraced each other in the cabin behind her. Through the cracked cockpit glass, she finally glanced to her left. The F-22 was still there, hovering like a sentinel before slowly pulling upward into a gentle climb. The fighter pilot didn't wait for applause, gratitude, or recognition. He simply dipped his wings in one final, silent salute, a gesture that carried more meaning than any words could ever express. She understood instantly. It was the salute of one aviator acknowledging another. Not a military gesture, not a ceremonial exchange, but a quiet message from the sky itself. "You did it. I believed in you. And today, you were extraordinary." She watched the F-22 disappear into the fading horizon, the sunlight glinting off its wings until it became nothing more than a distant spark. The emergency crews surrounded her aircraft, pulling open doors, guiding passengers to safety. But she remained in her seat for a long moment, allowing herself to truly feel the miracle she had just lived through. She had not been alone. Even when everything was falling apart, even when the world had narrowed to a cockpit full of alarms and a sky full of danger, she had found support in the unlikeliest moment, from a pilot who appeared out of nowhere, spoke her call sign like a promise, and refused to leave her side until every life was safe. And as the last traces of the fighter vanished into the sky, she whispered a quiet thank you, not just to him, but to the sky, the aircraft, and whatever force had allowed her to bring 183 souls home alive. It was a moment she would carry for the rest of her life, a moment when courage, trust, and the bond of aviators turned potential tragedy into a story of survival and unbreakable spirit. She stepped out of the aircraft at last, the world rushing up to meet her with cheers, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. But deep in her heart, she knew the truth of what had happened up there. She had saved them, they had saved each other, and the sky had witnessed something unforgettable.